Han didn't survive the unfreezing from carbonite. In the original trilogy, Han was unfrozen by Leia, and then proceeded to escape from the Sarlacc pit with his rebel friends. On one of our old videos though, one of our viewers contemplated the possibility of what if instead Han had died after he had been unfrozen. That's the story that we'll be looking at today. So settle in with your pet Lothcat, grab a glass of some Bantha Blood Fizz, yes, that's a real drink in canon, and let's dive right into this wacky what-if scenario. Our story begins in the dark, dingy halls of Jabba's palace. Princess Leia has just started sneaking around the dark halls while everyone else is asleep, and she ends up finding what she's looking for. Han Solo, Jabba's wall decoration, sits in a frozen position of torment. Leia feels a pang of pity and sorrow for Han, and she quickly begins the unfreezing process. To her dismay though, when Han's body thaws, he doesn't immediately wake up. She shakes Han, saying his name, hoping that he'll come to consciousness. However, Han remains unmoving, and there's no pulse when she places her fingers on his neck. Leia begins to try CPR on Han, but to no avail. It appears that Han Solo is dead. When the lights come on, and when Jabba catches Leia, she's teary-eyed, holding Han, gripped by grief. How does this event impact the rest of our story? Let's keep going and find out. As soon as Jabba catches Leia with Han, he begins taunting her, saying that both of them deserve this fate for taunting the almighty Jabba. Jabba still ends up making Leia into a slave for him, and he still throws Chewbacca in prison. Chewie, who hadn't seen Han's death, still thinks that his friend is alive. When Luke comes to Jabba's palace, intent on rescuing Solo and Leia, Jabba again laughs at him, saying that he clearly wasn't as mighty of a Jedi as he claimed to be if he hadn't known that Han was dead. For a moment, Luke is taken aback. He's a little bit shocked at the death of his friend. However, when Jabba pulls the lever, which drops Luke into the pit with his vicious pet, Luke is back on his game, ready to go. The poor Gamorrean guard who was dropped in with Luke still ends up getting eaten, but Luke manages to slay the beast, making it look effortless. After this takes place, Jabba ends up sentencing the young Jedi to death in the Sarlacc pit, where he could join Solo. However, Luke had had enough of Jabba's nonsense. R2, who's serving drinks to patrons in the palace, gets Luke's signal earlier than in the original timeline, and he fires the lightsaber out of his head. Just as Luke is about to pull it into his hands with the Force though, sharpshooter Boba Fett blasts it out of the air, causing it to fall to the floor in a heap of sparking, broken metal. Luke looks at the bounty hunter, who's now aiming his blaster in Luke's direction. Just as he had done at the entrance, Luke reaches out with the Force to choke Boba. As he does this, he senses multiple Gamorrean guards approaching him from behind, and he pushes them backwards with a Force push, without even looking. At this moment, Lando jumps into action too, rushing towards Leia. While Jabba is engaged in watching the ensuing commotion, he breaks her chain with his weapon, and the two turn to face the crime lord, ready to end his life if he doesn't go with them immediately. Jabba, being the proud crime lord that he is, laughs at their obstinance. At this, Lando stabs him through his slimy, slug-like body, killing the crime lord. Bib Fortuna, who is scuttled off to a corner somewhere, begs for his life from the rebels. He promises to hide in the shadows and that he'll live a better life for himself. Luke also releases Boba, asking if he wanted to find employment with the rebellion. Boba scoffs under his helmet, and he says that he'll work for whoever would pay him the highest. Luke nods at him, understanding, and he tells him that if their paths crossed again, he might not be as merciful as he was in this moment. Boba, understanding that he was outmatched, decides to leave and find new work. When the gang frees Chewie and the droids, and when Chewie finds out about Han's death, they all mourn together. Before Luke departs to Dagobah to find Yoda again, he takes a moment to be with his friends and comfort them with the Force. He admits to himself that despite being a Jedi, someone who was meant to be without attachment, he felt a pang of sadness within his own heart as well. As he departs from his friends and jumps into hyperspace, Luke enters a deep state of personal meditation and contemplation. On Dagobah, everything transpires just as it had in the original movie. Luke finds out about Leia being his sister, and he watches Yoda's passing. However, in this timeline as well, Luke ends up going into the dark side cave and forging a new lightsaber for himself. He finds a crystal deep, deep in the depths of the cave from an old Jedi Master who had ventured down there many, many years ago. He takes the crystal, feeling its presence within him, and builds a new lightsaber in Yoda's hut. Then he ends up going to meet with the rest of the rebellion. When Luke walks in, he hears Mon Mothma giving an impassioned speech to the rebellion about Solo's contributions, along with how he would be missed by each and every one of them. Lando takes back the Millennium Falcon, just as he believes that Han would have wanted him to, and the plan is set to attack Endor. This time, Leia, Chewie, Luke, and Lando are all motivated by the death of their good friend. At this point, everything transpires like it did in the movies. However, there is one crucial difference in this scenario, and that is the fact that Boba Fett never had to escape from the mouth of the Sarlacc. Instead, he thinks about how frustrated he was with Luke Skywalker, the man who had defeated him. His old childhood grudges against the Jedi begin to bubble up, and Boba decides that something needed to be done in this moment, and he would kill Luke, no matter what the cost. Boba returns to Jabba's palace, where he finds Bib Fortuna ruling, just like he saw at the end of The Mandalorian Season 2. It seemed that the petty crime boss had abandoned his oath to the rebels, where he said that he would live in peace for the rest of his days. Figures, right? At this point, Bib hasn't fattened himself with his gluttonous habits, but Boba does notice that he's eating a lot more. The bounty hunter shakes his head at the pitiful display, and he points his blaster at Bib. Some of the guards in the room jump to the aid of their lord, but Boba brings them to a quick end with his sharpshooting. He even blasts one of the corners of the wall with his jetpack rocket, which takes out many guards in the process. Again, Boba turns to Bib, pointing his blaster in the crime boss's direction and pressing it against his forehead. Bib asks Boba what he wants, and Boba lets him know. He says that he knew that Jabba had had enough influence to call for a meeting of the Syndicates, and that he knew that his information might be valuable. Boba, once again threatening Bib at gunpoint, tells him to summon the criminal syndicates of the galaxy to Jabba's palace for an immediate meeting. Bib says that he hadn't established himself well enough yet, making excuses about why he couldn't do that. Boba scoffs, saying that this would be the perfect opportunity for them to finally meet the great successor to Jabba the Hutt. Pushing the blaster deeper into Bib's forehead, the Twi'lek finally agrees. A few days later, the leaders of the major syndicates gather on Tatooine. The Pikes are there, along with the Black Sun and the remaining members of the Hutt Council, who had survived Vader's brutal slaughter in the War of the Bounty Hunter comics. Notably, Lady Kira and Crimson Dawn are not present. However, all of the other major criminal enterprises are. They grumble about how their businesses had been interrupted to be here, and Boba assures them all that it will be worth the wait. All of them are silent when the infamous bounty hunter speaks, knowing that if Fett was speaking, then something big was happening. Boba tells them all that their employment was in jeopardy. While Boba has personal motivations against Luke, he doesn't tell anyone that. Instead, Boba takes the angle of telling the criminals that slowly the Empire was losing ground to the rebels in their war, and that if they ended up defeating the Empire, then their goodwill with the government would run out. The Empire permitted the activity of the criminal syndicates so long as it didn't interfere with the overall stability of the government. The rebels, however, wouldn't take kindly to their behavior if they were to get into power. Boba says that he and Bib had seen the power and tenacity of some of the rebels firsthand, as they had been the ones to kill Jabba. At this, the other criminals gasped, shocked that a small band of insurrectionists could have taken down one of the most powerful crime lords in the entire galaxy. After hearing this, they all agree that something needed to be done now. Prince Xizor, the leader of the Black Sun at this point, says that he has many secret informants within the Rebel Alliance, and that he could share what their upcoming plans were. Allegedly, the fleet was planning on attacking an Imperial facility on the moon of Endor. Boba nods, saying that this is when they would make their move. All of the crime lords agree, and they start to organize with one another to assist the Empire at Endor. As the rebellion assembles its force on the ground and begins its attack on the Death Star shield generator, the criminals also start to mobilize. The rebel fleet prepares, and so too does the gang of ragtag syndicate leaders. While Leia, Chewie, and Luke are on the ground having fun with the Ewoks, Boba ensures that all of his armor is pristine, cleaned up, and ready to go. Soon, things were about to get ugly for the rebellion, and finally, Boba would have his revenge. Meanwhile, Luke ends up going to surrender himself to the Empire, and he goes up with Vader, trying to convince him to turn again to the light side, to no avail. He goes up to see the Emperor with Vader as well, and they end up engaging in their verbal sparring match, with the Emperor trying to convince Luke to kill his father. Then, just as Luke is beginning this little chat with the Emperor, and the rebel fleet arrives, so too does the criminal alliance. The Emperor laughs slyly, listening on the comm devices as Admiral Piet receives a hail asking if the Empire needed any help from Boba Fett himself. While Piet hates criminals and bounty hunters, he reluctantly agrees to their assistance, knowing that any aid against the Rebel Alliance was warranted. However, he also tells them to hold off from firing any shots at the Rebel flagships, as the Emperor had specifically requested that only the Death Star do so as a show of its new strength. The criminals oblige, sending in their fighter craft and dropships to help the battle on the ground after Piet gives them the coordinates to the shield generator. Boba, eager for conflict and hoping to find Luke, joins the ground assault, hoping to see the young Luke Skywalker there, not knowing that he was with the Emperor in the Death Star's throne room. Things were not looking good for the Rebel Alliance. As the battle continues to rage in the sky, Rebel forces are being cut down left and right. The criminal starfighters slice through X-Wings like they're butter. Along with the TIE fighters, who already possess strength in numbers, the Rebel pilots seemed doomed. Akbar desired to hold out a little longer, waiting to see if the shield generator could still be taken down. Wedge advises against this, but he complies, continuing to dance with his fighter squadron through the sea of enemy ships. Lando, piloting the Millennium Falcon with ease, cuts down many of the TIEs and criminal fighters, and he also ends up talking to Neenub about how great it is. But at the same time, he maintains a serious stance on things, and he keeps waiting for the order to go in and kill the Death Star. In addition, more and more capital ships from the rebels fall to blasts from the Death Star, which invigorates Palpatine. He cackles evilly. Luke and Vader continue to duel, and Palpatine laughs at the spectacle. On the ground, things don't look great for the rebels either. With the addition of the criminal forces to the ranks of the Imperials, the incompetency of the stormtrooper conscripts isn't as evident. Boba Fett uses brutal tactics to cut down the Ewoks, causing many of them to flee. Wicket, who's devoted to protecting his friend, Princess Leia, ends up falling to Fett's hand, a victim of his Mandalorian flamethrower. While Boba doesn't have a chance to battle Luke himself, he does have the opportunity to battle Leia and Chewie. While the princess is adept in combat, Boba is a hardened bounty hunter with many tricks up his sleeve. He knocks her unconscious in hand-to-hand combat and hands her off to one of the scout troopers, telling him that she was a valuable prisoner for the Empire and to get her to safety. As for Chewbacca, Boba Fett had no idea where he was. However, when he saw a giant AT-ST walker coming towards the base and firing upon his own men, Boba Fett knew that it had to be stopped. So, without even questioning it, he leans forward and shoots a rocket from his jetpack. This impacts the window of the AT-ST, revealing Chewie and a couple of Ewoks piloting the machine. Boba Fett uses his jetpack to go in through the window, and he immediately blasts the Ewoks inside of the cockpit, and he starts to fight with Chewbacca. Chewbacca, who is extremely mad, beyond enraged at Boba Fett for his part in the killing of his friend, ends up blasting the bounty hunter with a bowcaster. Boba Fett accepts the massive blowback, but his Beskar armor, his Mandalorian armor, ends up keeping him primarily intact. He'll have it bruised the next day, but other than that, he's okay. Boba Fett is pissed off, and he starts combating the Wookiee, hand to hand. Normally, Chewbacca would immediately rip the arms off of any one of his opponents, but Boba Fett is sly. Jango trained him well when he was younger, and he learned many different secrets about how to deal with Wookiees over the years, especially after working so closely with his friend Bossk. Boba Fett ends up going behind Chewbacca and whacking him on the head with his blaster, which stuns the Wookiee momentarily. Boba Fett then shoots his blaster at Chewbacca in stun mode, taking out the Wookiee. Boba Fett smiles, taking control of the AT-ST, and once again, he begins firing upon the rebels. This was truly a great day for Boba, even if he hadn't found Luke Skywalker. After these two key rebel leaders are taken out, in the skies above, it seems that there is no hope that the shield generator is coming down. Akbar orders a retreat, and the remaining fighters to return to Home 1. Lando takes out a few more Imperials before reluctantly returning to the capital ship. Palpatine cackles again as suddenly a group of cloaked interdictor-class ships emerges from behind Endor, activating their gravity wells. It's in this moment that Akbar realizes things are over. He sends out one final transmission to his rebel colleagues, saying that it has been an absolute pleasure serving with them, and that he is proud to have fought with them to the bitter end with the Imperials. They try to put up a fight, but it's absolutely no use. In this instant, Palpatine finally authorizes for the rest of his fleet to engage the rebel armada, knowing that things were over for them. And the Star Destroyers, combined with the might of the criminal ships and the Death Star, absolutely decimate the rebels, reducing every trapped ship to dust. This strategy with the interdictors works much better than what the Emperor tried to do in Return of the Jedi. Luke feels the pain of this loss, and he is crippled by it. Pain for his friends and for the people of the galaxy who would be forced to continue dealing with this tyrannical government. He can't kill his father, just like in the movie, and Palpatine proceeds to blast lightning his way. Vader, still caring for his son, sacrifices himself for him, throwing Palpatine down the reactor core once again. The two still share a heartfelt moment, but in the end, Vader still dies as Anakin. A rush of stormtroopers enters the room upon hearing about the commotion and the lack of response from Palpatine to Piet, and they find a grieving Luke sitting on the floor over his father. While the rebellion had lost, at least Anakin had still found the light, which was Luke's main mission. Now, surrounded by troopers with nowhere to go, Luke sees no need for more killing, especially since the rebels had lost. After all, many of these troopers were just normal men and women doing their jobs. Some of them had been conscripted. Luke surrenders to them, and he can sense their fear. After all, Luke had been the only one to come out alive with two of the most powerful men in the Empire. Leia, Luke, and Chewie are put in Imperial prison, sentenced to death for treason against the galactic government. Upon the Emperor's death, the Council of Moffs convenes with the Imperial military leadership and decides to put Admiral Gallius Rax in charge, who had been Palpatine's protege, and the only one who appeared to be an adequate successor to the Emperor who had ruled for decades. In this timeline, because the Empire still won on Endor, Rax decides to forego Palpatine's contingency plan. The Shadow Council is still around, but the Imperial officials who compose it are now in the open. Due to Boba's help on Endor, Rax offers him the position of Moff within the Empire, to rule over the Outer Rim. However, Fett says that his only demand is that he wants to see Skywalker dead, just like all of the other Jedi. He has no interest in a leadership role. After the ordeal on Endor, he bids the Empire adieu, and he continues to flip between odd jobs for the Imperials and criminal gangs. Rax is far more hesitant to use the Death Star than Vader, Tarkin, and Palpatine had been in the past. Instead, he uses it as a tool to convince systems into complying with the Empire's demands. While some more zealous members of the Imperial High Command believe that it should be used to punish worlds such as Mon Cala for disobeying Imperial rule during the Civil War, Rax disagrees. He says that this will only push them further from the Empire, and that it very may well cause another civil war. In this timeline, Thrawn still returns to the Empire, which Captain Pelion assures the Shadow Council will happen. His legion is loyal to him and to the Empire. Rax accepts Thrawn back among their ranks with open arms, and his reintegration into the Empire as a strategic legend discourages resistance. Of course, there are small sects, small pockets of insurgency, but following the capture of Chewie, Luke, and Leia, much of the central rebel leadership has disbanded, and they don't have a central figure to rally around. Mon Mothma is still at large. However, her influence on the Rebel Alliance is breaking down. Because of their defeat at Endor, many of the military leaders from the rebellion are now dead, and Mon Mothma cannot seem to get a grip on the remaining members of the rebellion, who are running scared across the galaxy, hoping that the Empire won't find them. Some of them even end up defecting to the Empire, giving rebel secrets in hopes that the Imperials will let them off lightly. Rax, being a much more lenient leader than Palpatine and the former Imperial leadership, ends up granting their requests, and he aids all of the people who defect to the Empire and give them rebel secrets, which further incentivizes people who are not dedicated enough to the cause to join the Empire. People who are defeated end up coming back to the Empire, hoping for mercy. The rebellion all but crumbles, except for a few factions. How do these events impact the finale of our story? Let's keep going and find out. In the end, Rax ends up being a well-liked emperor. He has filled a power vacuum that was created by insurgents. He twists the narrative to the galaxy, telling them that these had not been freedom fighters, but rather a group of religious zealots and radical republicans who were only striving to achieve their own power. ISB manages to find Mon Mothma, and she's locked up with the other 3 rebel leaders. In the end, Rax repeals their sentence to death, saying that if any of them chose to join him and rebuild the Empire from the ashes that they had created, then he would be open to the possibility. After all, as stated earlier, Rax was not a cruel ruler. He believed in second chances. However, he still also believes in justice. Obviously, none of our heroes listen to Rax, and they continue to spend the rest of their days in prison. The criminals maintain good relationships with corrupt Imperial officials, and Boba Fett continues to live his life as a lone bounty hunter. While he wanted to see Skywalker dead, he is satisfied seeing the Jedi rot in prison. He still hates many of the Jedis for what they did to his father, but he is satisfied to see that the last major Jedi is serving a long sentence. The rebellion had been crushed. Vader had died, and Palpatine's oppression came to an end. Rax rules strongly, but he maintains reason, keeping his Imperial officials in check. It seemed that the galaxy had finally come into a time of stability. Peace resounds throughout the post-Palpatine era, and many are satisfied with the new government. Even though our heroes got the short end of the stick, it seemed as though the lesser of 2 evils had prevailed within the Empire. Luke and Anakin had balanced the Force, and things, at the very least, seemed stable for the citizens of the galaxy. Hello there, fellow Star Wars fans. I hope that you enjoyed this What If story. If you did, I'd recommend that you check out this other video, What If Anakin Prevented Order 66. If you have any thoughts about our story, let us know down in the comments. Would you like to see part 2? If so, what do you think would happen next? Have an awesome rest of your day, everyone. And as always, I hope that you've had your delicious daily dose of